This is not a story about motherhood. This is a story about strategy, forged in the heart of the Ottoman Empire, in the Sultan's harem, a place where, beneath the rustle of silk dresses, the fates of continents were decided. Kösem Sultan, a woman whose name translates as leader, whose life was dedicated to the cold calculus of survival, stood at the epicenter of this storm. From Sultan Ahmed I, she bore not merely children, she bore potential sultans, precious chess pieces on a board where losing meant death, not for them, for their entire branch of the dynasty. The context of her motherhood is grim and merciless, the Law of Fratricide, that very law of brotherly murder, hung over the head of every prince like a finely honed yataghan. A sultan, ascending the throne, had the right to eliminate all his brothers in the name of the state's stability. Ahmed I, Kösem's husband, broke this law by leaving his brother Mustafa alive. An act of mercy? More likely, a fatal mistake that unleashed a tangle of intrigue for decades to come. Now, not only a sultan's son, but also his brother could take the throne. And Kösem, a brilliant tactician, understood. In this game, it was not enough to give birth to an heir. She had to secure his path to the throne, and, more importantly, keep him there, while competitors, her other sons or nephews, breathed down his neck. She bore, by various accounts, between 10 and 13 children, not all of whom survived. In the cramped chambers of Topkapi, infant mortality was as commonplace as political murder. But those who survived became the main actors in the bloody Ottoman saga of the 17th century. Through their destinies, ascensions, downfalls, tragic ends, Kösem sought to rule the empire, balancing between the roles of a loving mother and a ruthless regent. She was the Valide Sultan, the mother of the Sultan, the most powerful woman in the state, yet her maternal heart was clad in the armor of state necessity. Each of her grown sons, Murad IV, Ibrahim I, Sheikhzadeh Qasim, would wear the crown or die trying to obtain it. Each daughter, Aisha, Fatma, Hanzadeh, Geverhan, would become a bargaining chip in dynastic marriages, a shield and an instrument of influence. Their marriages would seal alliances, their palaces would become centers of intrigue, their loyalty tested to the limit between love for their mother and fear of the executioner. The story of Kösem's children is the story of the decline of the Sultanate of Women, an era when women from the harem virtually ruled the empire. It is a chronicle of how maternal ambition, colliding with the flywheel of Ottoman tradition, spawned a cycle of violence, where yesterday's sultan's son could become today's victim, and yesterday's bride, tomorrow's coup organizer. We will look into the faces of these princes and princesses who passed through the gilded cages of Topkapi. Their fates are the best illustration of a simple and dreadful truth. In the Ottoman Empire, royal blood was not a privilege, but the most dangerous substance in the world. And Kösem, the dispatcher of this blood, drank from this cup more than anyone. Subscribe so you don't miss new videos on the channel. Prince Mehmed, the first victim who determined everything. He was born under a sign of hope, March 8, 1605. In the chambers of Topkapi, a sigh of relief was breathed. Sultan Ahmed I finally had a healthy firstborn son. For his mother, the young Kösem, this was not just a child. It was a ticket into the great game, where the stake was the throne. While other favorites gave birth to daughters or lost infants, her Mehmed grew strong. His name, a tribute to the first conqueror of Constantinople, was a program and a promise. Mehmed's childhood passed in a gilded cage, but a cage with a strict schedule. The Quran early in the morning, then Arabic calligraphy, Persian poetry, military tactics, penmanship. He was the perfect product of the Ottoman princely factory, educated, pious, disciplined. Contemporaries noted his sharp mind and abilities. Kösem, whose influence grew with each new child, personally oversaw his education. She was building her son, brick by brick, into a future padishah. He lived in the kafes, special quarters for princes, together with his younger brothers, including the future formidable Murad IV. They were a family, but in a system where the throne was singular, they were potential enemies from the cradle. In 1617, hopes seemed destined to be fulfilled. Ahmed I was dying. Mehmed was 12, already participating in ceremonies, skilled in the saddle. The logic of succession screamed the throne to the eldest son. But the Ottoman dynasty always preferred the adrenaline of intrigue to logic. The throne was taken by Mehmed's uncle, the feeble-minded Mustafa I, and then by his half-brother, the young and ambitious Osman I. And here history takes a sharp turn. Mehmed transformed from an heir into a problem, a living, breathing, popular problem. He was 17 now. He had supporters among the janissaries and the ulema, raised on the principle of seniority. He was the legitimate alternative. And Osman I, after a failed campaign against Poland, returned to Istanbul not as a hero, but as a humiliated ruler. His power was teetering. Paranoia became his chief advisor. And then the ancient algorithm of the Ottoman court clicked into action. A threat? Eliminate. Physically. Not imprison, but liquidate. On February 12, 1621, a firman was issued. Osman II signed the death warrant for his own brother. The execution of a Shehzadeh is not a public spectacle. It is a quiet administrative procedure within the palace walls. Mehmet is strangled with a silk cord or smothered with a pillow in his own chambers. The executioner is not a common headsman, but the high-ranking eunuch Husrey Pasha. This is a crucial detail. The system was destroying its own children through the hands of its own servants. The body is secretly carried out and buried next to his father in the mausoleum of the Sultan Ahmed Mosque. That day, Kösem lost more than a son. She lost her illusions. Her tears and rage were powerless against the cold machinery of the state. Her status was not yet absolute. She could bear the Sultan and heir, but she could not protect him. This death was a point of no return, not only for Kösem, who began her mutation from a favorite into a ruthless politician. It set a precedent. The eldest, the most talented, the most prepared, proved to be the most vulnerable. His fate seemed to grant silent permission for future executions. The younger brothers, Murad IV and Ibrahim, saw this lesson. Murad would later execute his own brothers with a soul-chilling systematicity, remembering what had happened to Mehmet. Historians speculate about the ruler he might have become, a reformer like his father Ahmed, or a cruel tyrant like his brother Murad. We will never know. He remains forever potential, the most painful category in history. His legacy is not decrees or victories, but a void that Kösem tried to fill by promoting her other sons. And his grave, lying in the shadow of his father's mausoleum, a silent indictment of a system where maternal love was a luxury even a valide sultan could not afford. His story is the first act in the tragedy of Kösem's family, where power proved to be a poison that claimed her children, one by one. Ayshe Sultan, the girl born at the right moment. She came into the world in the very thick of change. Her father, the young Sultan Ahmed I, had just shocked the empire by refusing to execute his brother Mustafa. Her mother, the Greek-born Kösem, was not yet the all-powerful valide, but merely a favorite struggling for her place in the sun. The birth of Ayshe and her twin brother Mehmed in the same year was a jackpot for Kösem. It proved her fertility and provided two keys to the future:
a son for the throne and a daughter for political alliances. While her Shehzadeh brothers grew up in a gilded cage where the air was thick with the fear of future execution, Aisha was raised at the heart of power, the harem. Lessons in etiquette, poetry, the fundamentals of Islam, and foreign languages were not a whim, but a vital assignment. She was being prepared not just for marriage, but for the role of a diplomatic weapon, a channel of communication, and the family's financial manager. Kösem, that paragon of an Ottoman court woman, personally brought her to receptions with the valide. The girl learned to read not only poetry, but also people, their weaknesses, ambitions, the fear in their eyes. Her coming of age coincided with dynastic chaos. After Ahmed's death, the throne began to leap between her uncle Mustafa and her brother Osman. In this carousel, Kösem had to cling to power by any means necessary, and Aisha became her chief hook. First marriage, early 1610s. She's 6. Her husband is Gumul Cineli Nasuh Pasha, the Grand Vizier. The goal, to bind a key power of the empire to the family. The calculation is precise. The alliance works. But in the Ottoman Empire, the post of vizier was more dangerous than serving as a sapper. By 1614, her husband had lost his head. Nasuh was executed before Aisha's eyes, making her a widow at 9 years old. For most women, this would have been a tragedy. For Aisha Sultan, it was the completion of the first round. She returned to the palace only stronger, and her status had merely increased. She was now experienced, connected to the powerful of the world.
The Second Act, 1623. The throne of the Ottoman Empire is occupied by a boy, Murad IV, Aisha's younger brother. And their mother, Kösem, makes a dizzying leap. From the favorite of the late sultan, she transforms into the valide sultan and regent for her son. In essence, the most influential woman in the empire. But a throne occupied by a child is unsteady. It needs buttresses, and Kösem deploys her most reliable weapon, her daughters. Marriage becomes a diplomatic act, and the wedding the signing of a treaty of alliance. In 1626, her gaze falls upon Hafiz Ahmed Pasha, a twice-widowed Grand Vizier, experienced, intelligent, with impeccable connections. The initial plan was to give him her second daughter, Fatma. But Ahmed Pasha, a man adept at assessing advantage, makes an unexpected move. He insists on marrying the elder one, with Aisha. On March 13, 1627, the treaty is sealed. Aisha Sultan is married again. It would seem the peak of a career for the vizier. The regent's family is his. But in Ottoman politics, the summit is the most slippery place. Paradox. Scarcely after marrying the sultan's sister, Hafiz Ahmed Pasha loses his post as Grand Vizier. Formally, a resignation. In reality, a test of strength. The couple's family life in these years is a quiet harbor in a raging sea. They live in Istanbul, and around 1626 their son Mustafa is born. But this private idyll does not last long. The boy dies in 1628. Aisha's first and last attempt to step beyond the role of sister and daughter to become simply a mother ends in failure. Her destiny is the empire, not the nursery. In 1631, the flywheel of violence set in motion by Sultan Murad IV makes another turn. Grand Vizier Topal Recep Pasha, husband of Aisha's younger sister, Geverhan, is executed. The vizier's throne is empty again, and the proven Hafiz Ahmed Pasha returns to it. It would seem a triumph. He is again the second man in the state. His wife is the confidant of the valide. But this ascent proves fatal. February 1632. Istanbul is in flames. The Janissaries, those perpetual masters of the city, have rebelled, demanding the heads of the Sultan and his entourage. Murad IV, no longer a boy but a fierce youth, sends his brother-in-law, Ahmed Pasha, to suppress the rebellion. This is not merely an order, it is a test of loyalty and a dispatch to the front lines of a political war. On February 10, 1632, Grand Vizier Hafiz Ahmed Pasha goes out to negotiate with the rebels. He does not return. A frenzied mob of Janissaries tears him to pieces right at the walls of the palace. His head on a pike, a gruesome signal to the Sultan about who, for the moment, is in charge here. For Aisha, this was not just another widow's lot. It was a tragedy played out before her eyes. The husband, with whom she had perhaps shared the rare years of relative peace, was murdered with particular cruelty.
Third, fourth, fifth marriage. We lose count. Murtaza Pasha, perhaps. Then Cheleb Ahmed Pasha and Ipshir Mustafa Pasha. Each marriage was a new network of connections, new land holdings, influence flowing towards Kösem. Aisha was not a passive pawn. These serial marriages were not a tragedy about a woman unlucky in love. It was a turia. The profession of dynastic bride came with a stunning social package and, alas, high professional risks. In the 1630s, when Kösem, as regent for Murad IV, effectively ruled the empire, Aisha was her right hand in the harem. She relayed orders, softened her brother's anger, conducted delicate negotiations with the wives of viziers. Her philanthropy, funding soup kitchens for the poor, building fountains, was not mere piety. It was a family instrument, crafting an image of merciful and devout rulers in the eyes of the Istanbul street. The death of Murad and the accession of her other brother, Ibrahim I, the Mad, opened a new era of chaos, and here Aisha became a critically important stabilizer. Her husband was one of those trying to keep the wheel of the state carriage on its axle while the Sultan descended into madness. She was the channel through which Kösem tried to reach her son and control him. The culmination and retreat into the shadows came in the years 1648 to 1653, the overthrow and murder of Ibrahim. Then the deadly duel of the two Valide sultans, her mother Kösem and the young rival Turhan, mother of the underage Mehmed IV. In this war, Aisha was, of course, on her mother's side. The defeat and brutal murder of Kösem in 1651 was for her not only a personal tragedy, but the collapse of the entire political system she had helped to build.
Turhan Sultan emerged victorious, but here is what is telling. Aisha Sultan, the elder sister of the deposed and murdered sultans, the daughter of an executed Valide Sultan, survived. She was not eliminated. She was too wealthy, too deeply embedded in the palace structure, too useful as a symbol of legitimacy. She achieved the impossible. She outlived her own mother and quietly withdrew from high politics, preserving her fortune and status. She died at a respectable age for the time in 1656. She outlived her sultan brothers, her legendary mother, and several eras. She was buried in her father Sultan Ahmed I's mausoleum at the Sultanahmet Mosque. This is the final touch, underscoring she did not vanish into obscurity. Her legacy is not in military campaigns or decrees, it is in stone, in the fountains of Aisha Sultan, in drinking fountains for birds, in baths and schools scattered across Istanbul. It is the quiet yet eternal power of philanthropy. Historians call her a sultana of strong character. This is a rather dry description for a woman who went through 5, perhaps even 6 political marriages, survived the executions of her husbands, the depositions of her brothers, the murder of her mother, and still stayed afloat.
Her life is the perfect illustration of the fate of her brothers. They were public figures, doomed to die for the throne. She was a shadow player, destined for power through influence. Her weapon was patience, her shield, her title, her victory, a long life in the eye of the storm, where she not only endured but built her own impregnable monument.
Fatma Sultan, the steel rod of the dynasty. She was not born merely a daughter. At the moment when Kösem Sultan already held the strings of the harem in her hands and her sons were the living reserves for the throne, Fatma's arrival completed the strategic puzzle. From childhood, the girl breathed the scent of power, thick, pungent, with bitter notes of fear. Her world was bounded by the walls of top copy, but those walls were transparent to her mother's will. Lessons from the Quran gave way to lessons in political literacy. This vizier is ours, that one is neutral, and that one over there looks toward Mahfiruze, so he is an enemy. While embroidering with silk, she learned to weave intrigues. While playing the oud, she grasped the melody of diplomacy. She was prepared for one mission, to become a living bridge between Kösem's will and the loyalty of the imperial elite. Fatma Sultan entered the political game as soon as she left childhood. Her first recorded marriage to the Capudan Pasha, Grand Admiral Hassan Pasha, in 1624 was more of a trial balloon, a reconnaissance in force. This union dissolved as quickly as it appeared, a typical marriage of convenience to strengthen ties with the navy. Just 2 years later, Kösem conceived a larger gambit to bind the Grand Vizier himself, Hafiz Ahmed Pasha, to the family. But here occurred the first, yet telling failure. The vizier chose her elder sister, Aisha. For the ambitious sultana, this must have been an early, harsh lesson. In this marriage market, you always compete even with the closest of kin. Without losing pace, Kösem played another card, the Beyler Bey of Egypt, Kara Mustafa Pasha. Egypt was the granary of the empire, a source of colossal revenue. The marriage of 1626 looked like a brilliant investment, but in the Ottoman Empire of Murad IV's era, a high office was a statistical harbinger of execution. On December 25, 1628, the investment was devalued. Mustafa Pasha's head fell by the Sultan's order. Fatma's was widowed again, but her treasury, one must assume, was replenished with a generous mahr, dower. Her next husband, Capudan Pasha Khan Bulatzadeh Mustafa Pasha, lasted full 5 years. His execution on July 2, 1636, seems to have put a definitive end to one period of Fatma's life. She recedes for a quarter of a century, 1636 to 1660, years of forced lull, not a romantic interlude, but a strategic one. Her sultan brothers, one after another, went mad or were sent to the block. Her mother balanced on the edge of a yataghan's blade. To be in the spotlight had become mortally dangerous. But even in the shadows, dynastic storms caught up with her. The story of her younger brother, Sultan Ibrahim, marrying his concubine, Humasha, is pure blood-soaked vaudeville. Fatma, together with her sisters and niece, dared to express their protest. The Sultan's response was obscene and humiliating, confiscation of their property in favor of his favorite, and a reduction of their allowances to a level lower than that of common concubines. This was not mere anger. It was a ritual of humiliation, a demonstration. Your blood means nothing before my whim. For the first time, Fatma felt that the status of a sultana was a paper shield against the madness seated on the throne. Then came the greatest catastrophe, the night of September 2nd, 1651. Her world, her anchor, her deity, Kösem Sultan, was strangled in her own chambers. Fatma found herself not merely orphaned, she became a useless artifact of a deposed regime. Her shock and fury were directed at Turhan Sultan, the new master of the harem. The bitter irony was that Turhan had been raised by her very own sister, Atike. Betrayal had come from the innermost circle. And just when it seemed her career as a dynastic bride was over, fate delivered the most absurd, cynical, and brilliant episode of her life, the marriage to Melik Ahmed Pasha in 1662. She was nearly 60, he was over 70. He was a former Grand Vizier, the widower of her own niece. This marriage was not planned by Kösem, it was cobbled together at the new court, and it was not an honorable favor, but a refined punishment for the Pasha himself. Grand Vizier Kuprali Mehmed Pasha, a staunch supporter of Turhan, sarcastically remarked that he had made Ahmed Pasha feed an elephant. Fatma, with her appetites and status, was compared to a voracious, expensive-to-keep animal.
But it was here that the old fox bared her claws. On the wedding night, she presented her new husband not with love, but with a financial agreement containing astronomical demands. When he refused, she coldly threatened an immediate divorce with the return of her dowry, which equaled the annual tax revenue of all Egypt. This was not a marital dispute, it was a negotiation between two states. The Grand Vizier himself had to intervene to settle the scandal. The marriage lasted mere months. The Pasha died in September 1662. And here is the final chord. Defying the law, Fatma entered into a fierce conflict with the all-powerful Koprulu and wrested from him her late husband's entire fortune. This was not merely a victory. It was a triumph of will, a final crushing flick on the nose to the entire system that had thought it could use her as a laughingstock. Her subsequent marriages to Kanbur Mustafa Pasha and Közbekçi Yusuf Pasha already seemed like a formality, a ritual confirming her unassailable status. She did not marry. She appropriated successive fortunes, accruing wealth as a coral accrues the skeletons of polyps. She died in 1670, not in exile or disgrace, but in her own house in Istanbul, and was buried with the highest honors in the turbe of her father, Sultan Ahmed I. Her life was a long road, paved with the tombstones of her husbands. Each slab on that road made her taller, richer, and more invulnerable. From a political instrument, she transformed into an independent force, outliving her creators, her handlers, and her mockers. She did not merely pass through the system, she forced the system to work for her until her very last breath.
Kösem Sultan, an asset in a gilded frame. 1608, the Topkapi Harem. A girl is born whose name means jewel of the world, Kösem. But in the political alchemy of the Ottoman Empire, the children of sultans are rarely mere jewels. They are currency of the highest denomination, diplomatic tools, the interlocking gears of power. Her biography reads as a chronicle of strategic alliances, where the personal is merely an elegant facade for affairs of state. She is 4 years old. 4. At this age, Kösem Sultan is already getting married. On June 13, 1612, she is betrothed to Okyus Mehmed Pasha, the mighty Grand Vizier. Effectively, this is the signing of a peace treaty, sealed with the body of a child. The young princess becomes a living bridge between the dynasty and the bureaucratic elite. Her husband is Okyus, the ox. The nickname speaks not only to his physical strength, but also to his role, the beast of burden of the empire, whose loyalty is now guaranteed by marital bonds. But in this game, even grand viziers are temporary figures. In 1620, the Pasha dies. The first chapter closes. Kösem is a 12-year-old widow. The second chapter begins swiftly. Just 3 years later, in 1623, Kösem uses her daughter again, this time to strengthen the navy. The new groom, Topal Recep Pasha, the lame,
admiral of the Ottoman fleet. The marriage coincides with a pivotal moment. Kösem has just reclaimed power, becoming Valide Sultan for her son, Murad IV. Need to secure the navy's support? Arrange a marriage. It's a cold calculation, wrapped in silks and gold. Here, however, an unexpected plot twist occurs. From this political union is born not just another political unit. In August 1630, Gevher Khan gives birth to a daughter, Safiye. Gevher Khan's only documented child, a tiny beam of something real amidst the cynical matrimonial schemes. But the Ottoman court does not tolerate happy endings. 2 years later, Topal Recep soars even higher, becoming Grand Vizier, and then he falls, swiftly and fatally. On May 18, 1632, he is executed by order of Sultan Murad IV, her own brother. The reasons? Influence, growing power, perhaps intrigue. Gevher Khan is a widow again, now with a young daughter in her arms. She is 24. Behind her are 2 political marriages and personal tragedy.
1643. She is 35. By 17th century standards, a mature age. Her third husband, Siyavush Pasha, again a Grand Vizier. This is no longer a brilliant match for a young princess, but a union of experienced players. Perhaps not solely Kösem's will, but her own choice or consent. Siyavush remains with her the longest, 13 years, until his death in 1656. And here, historiography presents a detective's fork in the road. The famous traveler Evliya Çelebi drops a fact into the water like a stone, creating ripples. He claims that Siyavush Pasha's wife was not Gevher Khan, but her daughter from Recep, Halima Sultan. Consider this. If we believe Çelebi, the picture changes dramatically. Instead of Gevher Khan's 3 marriages, we see 2 of her own, followed by the strategic marriage of her daughter, whom she might have settled into life just as Kösem once settled her. This version transforms Gevher Khan from a perpetual pawn into a piece that begins to make moves herself, a mother continuing the cycle of dynastic alliances. What is the truth? There are no precise answers. The history of the sultanas was often written through the lens of rumors and court gossip. Both versions are possible. Both paint a portrait of a woman whose personal life was inseparably fused with the machinery of state. After 1656, Gevher Khan withdraws from the marriage market. She is nearly 50. She has outlived 3 powerful husbands, her regent mother, her sultan brothers. She has seen the empire execute and exult. In 1660, having survived her mother Kösem by only a few years, she dies. Her final resting place is not beside her husband's, but in the mausoleum of her father, Sultan Ahmed I, at the Blue Mosque. The end of her journey is a return to the source, to the one man in her life whose position was not a subject of political bargaining, simply a father, even if he was a sultan. Princess Kösem Sultan, a calm harbor in the ocean of palace storms. If the harem were a TV series, then Princess Kösem Sultan could be called a character who avoided the main tragedies, not a star of intrigues, not a victim of conspiracy, but rather a rare example of relative tranquility within those walls. Her life is not a story of dramatic rise and fall, but of cautious, almost artful balancing. She was born in 1609, during the height of her father Sultan Ahmed I's reign. The question of her maternity is the first enigma. Some sources confidently name the young Kösem as her mother, while others point to the Sultan's first wife, Mahfiruz. This duality seems to set the tone for her entire biography. Kösem Sultan often remained in the shadows, her figure lacking glaring certainty. Yet her first marriage in 1623 makes one take a closer look. Her chosen one was not a powerful pasha, but simply Bayram Pasha. His career ascent would come later,
This was unusual and speaks volumes, either of a personal choice or a subtle calculation. Perhaps Kösem, if she was indeed her mother, even then preferred for her daughter not a dazzling but dangerous alliance near the throne, but a more stable option, and she was not mistaken. The marriage to Bayram Pasha became that rare diamond in sultanic biographies, a happy one. Not a political transaction, but a union that lasted 15 years until his death in 1638. 5 years of quiet widowhood, followed by a second marriage to Nakash Mustafa Pasha, who survived her only 3 years. 2 husbands, both died of natural causes, both relationships long and, by all accounts, peaceful. In the context of an era where husbands often perished in political meat grinders, this is almost fantastic. However, even her cautious life was touched by the madness emanating from the pinnacle of power. Her younger brother, Sultan Ibrahim I, whose whims had long ceased to be mere eccentricities, committed an act of glaring familial betrayal in 1647. Enamored with his new wife, Humayra Sultan, he confiscated the property of 3 of his sisters, Hanem, Aisha, and Fatma, and gifted it to his favorite. This was not just a whim. It was a stab in the back, a public humiliation and financial ruin inflicted by her own brother. Imagine for a moment this scene. The daughter of Ahmed I, sister of the ruling sultan, stripped of her fortune by the caprice of his new passion. This speaks more eloquently than any chronicle about the degree of decay that reigned at the court. But Hanzadeh survived even this. She did not engage in plots or seek revenge. She waited until her brother Ibrahim was deposed and killed, waited for her nephew Ahmed IV to ascend the throne, and only then, in September 1650, did her story quietly conclude. She died in her Istanbul home, having outlived the era of fratricide, the reign of her mad brother, and the downfall of her mother, Kösem, who had been killed 3 years prior. She was buried not in a remote prison monastery, but with honor, in the turbe of Sultan Ibrahim I at Hagia Sophia. The irony of fate, the final resting place of the woman he had robbed, became his own mausoleum. So who was Hanzadeh? A heroine? No. A victim? Not quite. Her fate is a masterclass in the art of inconspicuous survival. In a world where her sisters burned in the fires of ambition and intrigue, she managed to remain in the shadows, build a quiet personal harbor, and endure. Her life did not become a legend, but it became a testament. Sometimes in the Ottoman palace, the greatest triumph was not power, but the ability to die in one's own bed of natural causes, leaving behind not a scandal, but only dates on a modest tombstone. Her biography lacks bloody climaxes, but it possesses an ending rare for that era, a human one.
Shehzadeh Suleiman was born in the very heart of Ottoman power, within the golden chambers of Topkapı, at a time when his mother, Kösem, was no longer merely a favorite, but the architect of real power. The years around 1610–1611. His world, from the very first days, was bounded by marble walls, yet permeated by the quiet hum of intrigue. Was he Kösem's blood son? Historians would later grapple with conjectures, studying blurred records. But Ottoman chroniclers, without hesitation, inscribed him within the circle of her children. For them, he was her project, her responsibility, her potential in the great game. In this system, motherhood was measured not only by blood kinship, but by the strength of political patronage. His childhood was a classic gilded cage, only this cage was a fresh, innovative invention of his father, Sultan Ahmed I, who had abolished legalized fratricide. The irony was that the cage proved perhaps more terrifying than the sword. Instead of a quick death, a lifetime of waiting. Suleiman studied the Quran, delved into the subtleties of Persian poetry, mastered military tactics. He could quote Rumi and chart stellar maps. Contemporaries noted his inclination toward astronomy.
But all this erudition was merely icing on a prison ration. His real overseers were not his tutors, but the black eunuchs, loyal first and foremost to his mother and the current balance of power. The death of Ahmed in 1617 was, for the 11-year-old boy, not a personal tragedy, but a change of scenery in the prison play. The throne began its mad marathon, the insane uncle Mustafa I, then the young and ambitious half-brother Osman II. Kösem in these years was like a chess player moving in pitch darkness, receding into the shadows, maneuvering, bribing, doing everything to ensure her sons, Mehmed, Murad, Qasim, Ibrahim, and Suleiman, remained live pieces on the board and not pawns swept from it.
His teenage years were filled with the sound of janissary boots on palace stone. The year 1622, Osman II is strangled in the grim dungeons of Yedikule. Power, gasping and stumbling, returns to the feeble-minded Mustafa, then falls into the hands of his younger brother Murad IV. Murad is 11. Kösem becomes regent, and while his mother struggles to keep the empire from disintegration, Shehzadeh Suleiman, now a youth of 12 or 13, observes this chaos from the narrow window of his cage. He grew up in a shadow, not the shadow of his father, but the shadow of his brother Murad, whose own childhood was poisoned by the fear of a coup and whose character was tempered in the steel of paranoia. Murad was coming of age. By 1632, he had cast off his mother's regency and emerged onto the stage with the iron resolve of a tyrant who believed only cruelty could save the state. His gaze inevitably fell upon the brothers in the cage. They were walking symbols of alternative, living lottery tickets for any discontented pasha or rebellious janissary uprising. Shehzadeh Suleiman, by then a young man in his early 20s, became the first target. A formal pretext was quickly found, hints of secret liaisons with janissary officers and disaffected ulema. The charge was conspiracy. In a system where a single suspicion was equated with proven guilt, this was more than enough. The end came in 1635, a drama without an audience. In the prince's chambers, the very rooms where he had studied the stars and composed poetry, the executioners appeared. The procedure was rehearsed to the point of automation. A silk cord, a quiet struggle, silence. Legends that have reached us through the centuries paint the scene of Kösem's final confrontation with Murad, the mother prostrating herself, pleading for her son's life, the son Sultan, cold and implacable, uttering the phrase that became a verdict on the entire system: better one tyrant on the throne than a multitude of contenders in a cage. This was not merely an act of fratricide, it was a manifesto. Murad was clearing the political field, and Suleiman became a casualty of this total purge. His body was laid to rest without pomp in the shadowy mausoleum of his father, next to his brother Mehmed. For Kösem, this was the terrible yet familiar price of power. Of her Shehzadeh sons, 2, Murad and later Ibrahim, would ascend the throne, but both would bring her more grief than glory. Suleiman, however, remained in history as the ghost of a lost alternative. A romantic image of him endures, a handsome youth with the gift of poetry, not a ruler, not a warrior, but a poet. A victim not so much of fraternal cruelty, but of the uncompromising logic of imperial survival, where sensitivity was a fatal flaw. His anonymous niche in the imperial turbe, a silent monument to all those ground to dust by the system to ensure dynastic continuity. He could have been a second Ahmed, gentle, pious, a builder, but history, especially Ottoman history, seldom values such alternatives. It needed executioners, not poets.
Murad IV, an iron fist forged in a gilded cage. His story begins not with a throne, but within a harem. The year is 1612, Topkapi Palace, the epicenter of power and intrigue. Kösem, the beloved Haseki of Sultan Ahmed, gives birth to her third son. From his first days, little Murad becomes a living symbol of his mother's ambition, her primary investment for the future. He is surrounded not by mere nursemaids, but by the finest tutors, ulema, and veterans of the divan. He memorizes Quranic verses and battle tactics, calligraphy, and the art of reading courtiers' faces. He is being groomed to rule, yet the empire itself seems to have forgotten the meaning of order. His father's death in 1617 shatters this fragile world. Murad is 5. The throne begins to feverishly change hands. His insane uncle Mustafa I, then his stepbrother Osman II. Beyond the palace walls, janissary revolts rage, and the blades of coups whistle through the air. The boy grows up in an atmosphere of perpetual fear, where today's sultan could be tomorrow's corpse in a dark well. These childhood impressions become the fuel for his future tyranny. Finally, in 1623, fortune makes its choice. Following the brutal murder of Osman II, the janissaries, themselves frightened by their own lawlessness, seek a legitimate figure. Their gaze falls upon the 11-year-old Murad. He ascends the throne, but this is a mere formality. Real power now lies with his mother, Kösem, who receives the title of Valide Sultan and regent. Thus begins the era of her rule from behind the scenes. Murad is a silent observer at meetings of the divan. He sees how his mother's softness and diplomacy clash with the greed of pashas, the corruption of viziers, and an empty treasury. The empire is cracking at the seams. War with Persia, bloody revolts in Anatolia. Istanbul transforms into a carnival city of vice. People openly drink, smoke forbidden tobacco, and trade in contraband. All of this unfolds before the eyes of the teenager whose concept of power crystallizes into a simple formula. Strength is the only argument understood. His maturation is a slow boil. By the age of 20, his cup of patience overflows. In 1632, he makes a sharp, decisive move. His mother's regency is declared over. Murad IV takes the reins of power into his own hands, and he begins not with reforms, but with a purge. He sets a new fashion for terror. The Sultan trades his embroidered kaftans for the simple garb of a janissary, and, axe in hand, prowls the night streets of Istanbul. Caught smoking or drinking, execute on the spot. Caught speaking with a stranger, suspect a conspiracy. Paranoia becomes the system of governance. The first to fall are the closest. The Law of Fratricide, permitting the murder of brothers for the sake of order, finds in him a zealous executor. In 1632, on his orders, his elder brother, Shehzade Suleiman, is killed. Kösem is horrified. She begs, she implores, he is your own blood. But for Murad, blood is weaker than power. In 1638, the turn comes for his other brother, Kösem. His mother's tears no longer carry any weight. The bond between them is severed forever. Murad is left alone with an empire he intends to save with iron and blood. And, paradoxically, it works. His cruelty is not mindless, it is a tool. He beheads corrupt pashas, hangs rebels, reorganizes the army. His military campaigns, especially the brilliant reconquest of Baghdad from the Persians in 1638, restore the empire's lost military prestige. He bans tobacco, coffee, alcohol, not out of piety, but to cut the threads of conspiracy spun in coffee houses. He imposes chessboard order on a board where all the pieces had long lived by their own rules. But the price of this order is his own soul. Chroniclers describe in horror mountains of corpses. He became what he feared most, an absolute ruler in an absolutely empty circle. Even victory tastes bitter. Even the glory of the great for restoring military might echoes in the empty chambers of a mother who no longer recognizes him. His decline is swift and ironic. A strict ban on alcohol? He himself, according to sources, died of cirrhosis or gout caused by years of heavy drinking. 27 years, that is the sum. On his deathbed in 1640, he gives his last order, which brings everything full circle. His only surviving brother, Ibrahim, must be executed. But this final command is never carried out. A full circle. Murad IV, the tyrant who broke the back of anarchy, departs, returning power to the one with whom it began, his mother. He leaves behind fortified borders, rebuilt mosques, and a chilling horror in the memory of his contemporaries. Shehzade Kösem. He was born under the shadow of a great father, Sultan Ahmed I, and an all-powerful mother, Kösem. The year 1614. It would seem that a prince of the blood should have had a brilliant future, but Ottoman reality was different. It resembled a trap where the mechanism snapped shut immediately after the death of the reigning sultan. After Ahmed's death in 1617, by all conventions, the throne should have passed to his eldest son from another wife, Osman II, and Kösem and his brothers faced an unenviable fate, the silken cord. But history took its first unexpected turn. The one who ascended the throne was not Osman, but the boy's uncle, Mustafa I, who was considered feeble-minded. Yet the political pendulum of the Ottoman Empire swung with a bloody amplitude. Mustafa was overthrown, and the throne was indeed taken by Osman II. Once again, Kösem had to wait, holding his breath. And then the pendulum swung with monstrous force. The young Sultan Osman was torn apart by a rebellious Janissary mob, and once again the unfortunate Mustafa was returned to the throne. These few years were a time of unimaginable chaos, when sultans were changed like gloves, and princes lived awaiting a death sentence. In 1623, the star of Kösem and her sons finally rose. Kösem's elder brother, the young Murad IV, became sultan. For the 20-year-old Kösem, this seemed to be a lucky ticket, and the first years of Murad's reign confirmed this. But within the Ottoman dynastic code existed a relentless paradox. The most dangerous enemy of a sultan was not a rebellious pasha or the Persian shah, but his own brother, whose very existence automatically made him an alternative, a focal point for any opposition. Upon reaching adulthood, Murad IV transformed from a youthful ruler into a formidable, paranoid despot. With an iron fist, he imposed order upon the crumbling empire, and order, in his understanding, began with his own family. A brother, even the most loyal one, was a living embodiment of a threat, especially a brother who was intelligent, respected, and grown, someone like Kösem. Historians pieced together the exact strings of this tragedy, fragment by fragment. Perhaps there were rumors of Kösem's discontent with his brother's cruelty. Perhaps a courtier casually mentioned his name as a potential claimant. Or perhaps Murad, whose suspicion only grew with the years, simply decided to clear the field. For some reason, real or imagined, the Sultan perceived a threat in Kösem. In 1638, on the eve of his famous campaign to Baghdad, Murad IV made a fateful decision. He could not leave a potential nucleus of rebellion behind him in the capital. The order was given. Shehzade Kösem, son of the great Ahmed and brother of the reigning sultan, was executed in Istanbul. He was only 24 years old. This was not an outburst of rage, but a cold, administrative act, a strategic elimination of risk. By going to war, Murad was securing his rear in the most reliable way from his point of view. Kösem Sultan, who had once saved her sons, was powerless against the will of another son who had ascended to the pinnacle of power. Qasim found eternal rest in the tomb of Sultan Murad III at Hagia Sophia, in a quiet tomb where the clamor of the Janissaries' cauldrons and the whispers of palace intrigues did not reach. His death became a grim reminder. In the Ottoman Empire, being a sultan's brother was often more dangerous than being his enemy.
Atiqe Sultan, Shadow of the Great Mother. If the harem is a closed universe with its own laws of gravity, then Atiqe Sultan orbited the most powerful center. The year is 1614. She is the youngest, the fifth point in a constellation of sisters. Her childhood is a rapid succession of palace coups. Sultan Ahmed I dies. The throne is occupied first by her uncle Mustafa, then by her brother Osman II, then by her uncle again. Atiqe, with her mother and sisters, is in the old palace, not in exile, but not at the epicenter either. They are in limbo, like an important cargo temporarily stored in a warehouse. They await their hour. And that hour arrives in 1623, when her brother, Murad IV, ascends the throne as a child. Kösem becomes regent. Now every daughter, every pawn, or rather queen, must be positioned with cold calculation. She is 14, the age when a modern teenager rebels against their parents. Atiqe does not rebel. She becomes an instrument. She is given in marriage to Jafar Pasha. No one asks about her feelings. This is an alliance, a treaty, a consolidation of loyalty. 5 years, and the Pasha dies. The first chapter of her adult life is closed. She returns to the family fold, not as a grieving widow, but as a freed asset. Her mother can place her once more. A new husband, Kocha Kenan Pasha. The year is 1633. Georgian by blood, Ottoman in spirit, a loyal ally of Kösem. Their home becomes not just a residence, but a strategic salon where threads of influence are woven. And here occurs one of those turns that series screenwriters love, because life has already invented them.
Kösem receives a gift from the Crimean Khan, a young concubine, Turhan, the girl whose name will enter history as the gravedigger of her giver. But for now, she is merely a gift. And where to place her? Of course, with her daughter, with Atiqe. Thus, the Sultana unknowingly becomes the governess of her own future doom. She teaches Turhan languages, customs, the etiquette of the seraglio. She invests in her knowledge that Turhan will later, becoming the wife of the mad Ibrahim I and the mother of Sultan Mehmed IV, turn against Kösem herself. The bitter irony, Atiqe's school graduated its own chief rival. Kenan Pasha is dying. The year is 1652. Almost immediately, within the same year, Atiqe is married again, to Doganji Yusuf Pasha. She is nearing 40, a venerable age for an Ottoman woman, but her value as a symbol, as a link to the legacy of Kösem, remains high. She is marrying for the 3rd time. This marriage seems to be her quietest, most personal one. Yusuf Pasha will not die until 1670, granting her nearly 2 decades of relative peace. And what of the children? Here lies the central, quiet tragedy in the noisy opera of her life. All her children, from all 3 husbands, die in infancy. Imagine the contrast. She is the sister of sultans, the daughter of a Valide sultan, the wife of grand viziers, the center of political intrigue, and yet an empty harem, silence in the nursery. Her personal dynasty ended before it could even begin. All her energy, all her resources went towards strengthening the dynasty of her mother and her brothers, but never her own. She outlived her mother, brutally murdered in 1651, on the orders of that very Turhan whom she once tutored. She outlived her sultan brothers. She died around 1674, quietly. She was buried not in a separate mausoleum, but in the turbe of her brother, Sultan Ibrahim, at Hagia Sophia. Kösem Sultan is neither a failure nor a triumph. Hers is the flawless execution of a role, the role of Kösem's daughter. She was the perfect instrument in her mother's hands, obedient, connective, diplomatic. Her fate is a story of loyalty that resulted in personal emptiness. She was a strong link in the chain, a link that never became the beginning of a new chain. The shadow of the Great Mother was too long for anything of her own to grow within it.
Ibrahim I, the victim of a cage that devoured its own empire. He was born on November 5, 1615. By the time of his birth, Kösem Sultan already held the harem in an iron grip as the favorite consort of Ahmed I. Ibrahim became her fifth and final contribution to the game of regency. As a boy, he watched as the world beyond the walls of his chambers in Topkapi crumbled and was rebuilt in blood. The death of his father in 1617, when Ibrahim was 2, the execution of his elder brother Mehmed in 1621, the ascension of another brother, Murad IV, in 1623, all of this was for him not history, but a changing of scenery outside the window of his golden cage. This cage, the kafez, the isolated quarters for Shehzades, was his universe for 22 years. First with his brother Kösem, and after Kösem's execution on Murad's orders, alone. He was taught the Quran, Persian poetry, and military arts, but the primary lesson was animal fear. The whispers of eunuchs, footsteps outside the door, any sound could mean death. Chroniclers wrote that from this isolation, Ibrahim emerged with a mind clouded by a curse. A modern diagnosis would read as severe paranoia, schizophrenia, or profound traumatic depression. He was a walking wound in brocade and a turban. When Murad IV died of cirrhosis in 1640, the empire gasped. All legitimate male heirs were dead. Only Ibrahim remained, a ghost from the palace's back chambers. Kösem, once again holding the title of Valide Sultan and regent, solemnly ushered her last son to power. It was a spectacle. A 24-year-old man, pale and terrified, amidst the salute of the Janissaries. Liberation turned into the unleashing of accumulated madness directly onto the throne. Ibrahim's psyche, broken by confinement, could not withstand freedom. He did not rule, he acted out his childhood traumas with the budget of an entire empire. He was nicknamed Delhi, the Mad. This was not alcoholism, it was a compulsive obsession. His passion became furs, especially sable. He demanded his viziers find him a whole sea of sables, gifted fur coats, and ordered one giant coat to be sewn, costing as much as the annual revenue of an entire province. The treasury swiftly emptied for his whims, rooms strewn with jewels where he indulged in revelries with his favorites, first Humasha Sultan, then Shivekar, whose influence became boundless.
Trying to hold the helm, Kösem appointed loyal men like Hezar Pare Ahmet Pasha, but her son now saw conspiracies in every glance. Grand viziers were changed like gloves, many sent to the block. Foreign policy became an extension of his delusions. Defeat by the Venetians at the Dardanelles, the disastrous start of the Cretan War. The empire was hurtling toward the abyss, accompanied by the soundtrack of his hysterics. The culmination was his tyranny. For the slightest offense, he ordered eunuchs to be drowned. Once, enraged by a rumor that a harem concubine had been with an outsider, he commanded the entire harem, nearly 300 women, to be drowned in the Bosporus. Reality had blurred for him. By 1648, the cup of patience overflowed. Inflation, famine, Janissary revolts. The divan and the ulama, the highest religious authorities, issued a fatwa. The sultan was not in his right mind and unfit to rule. Even Kösem, desperately clinging to power through her son, saw the ship sinking. She was torn between maternal feelings and cold calculation. Under pressure from her young and ambitious daughter-in-law, Turhan Sultan, mother of her young grandson Mehmed, Kösem switched to the side of the rebels. It was her choice to save the dynasty by sacrificing her own child. The end was swift and without pomp. On August 18, 1648, 10 days after his deposition, executioners entered the room where the deposed sultan was held. Their instrument was an ordinary velvet cushion. The 32-year-old Ibrahim was strangled. His body, wrapped in a carpet, was thrown into the waters of the Bosporus and later buried modestly in the Suleymaniye tomb next to his brothers. Thus ended the line of Kösem's sons on the Ottoman throne. His reign, 8 years of chaos, is considered by historians the lowest point of the sultanate of women. But Ibrahim I is not merely a tyrant, he is a living indictment of the system. The state, which for 20 decades kept its heir in a state of animalistic fear, got exactly the ruler it had raised, a paranoid, cruel, reality-detached monster. His madness was a diagnosis for the entire dynasty.
So, what remained for Kösem when the dust of the power struggles settled? Numbers and titles on paper, and an abyss. Officially, 2 of her sons sat upon the throne, Murad IV and Ibrahim I. But these are 2 portraits of the same curse, loneliness at the summit. Daughters, strategic assets with broken hearts. Their fates were outwardly brilliant. Aisha, Fatma, Geferhan, Hanzadeh, each became the wife or mother of grand viziers, a crucial link in her mother's political alliances. Their marriages were moves on a chessboard, cementing alliances and neutralizing threats. But their personal lives were filled with drama. By the end of her life, Kösem had no living sons left. Her power was concentrated in her daughters and grandchildren. She fought to the death for her grandson, Mehmed IV, against his mother, Turhan, in the last harem war of women, and she lost. She was killed on the orders of her daughter-in-law, and her body was shamefully thrown out of the palace gates. The fate of her children is the perfect illustration of the Ottoman paradox. To preserve the dynasty, it was necessary to systematically destroy its individual members. To hold on to power, it was necessary to sacrifice love, trust, and the bonds of motherhood and sisterhood.